So, just a couple of things I want to reflect back on what the Vice Chancellor was mentioning in his short note about the beauty of the subject, the statistics, which is the beauty of the subject is such that it has its presence in each and every domain that you can think of, be it marketing, retail, finance, e-commerce, pharma, n number of, you think of any faculty, you think of any domain, it has its presence there. But the whole intention of my presentation and the presentations that are planned for the rest of the day is more restricted to pharmaceutical applications of the statistics, how statistics is being applied in pharma industry. But before we understand the application of statistics in pharma industry, it's always important really to help us understand a bit more about the domain. What is the domain that we are talking about, which means that the drug development life cycle, what is that molecule about? How the journey of the molecule happens from research to lab. So, it's very much important to really understand that particular thing. But before that, let me just, okay. So, just a standard disclaimer note which we usually present in any conferences, that the content of the slide is just my own opinion and has nothing to do with the organization that I am associated with. And it's more used from, the intention of this slide is more from educational perspective, nothing beyond that. So some of the topics, a broad perspective about the topics that I am going to cover in next 40-45 minutes is the drug development life cycle, what the areas of statistical applications and clinical research, role of statistician in BAB, that is bioavailability and bioequivalence and clinical trials. What are the competencies basically are required for a statistician to be a part of the pharma industry? And of late we have been talking more about data science, which the Vice Chancellor as well as Arjun Roy did touch base upon the data science, which is the buzzword, current buzzword in the industry and also in the market. And there are a lot of institutes which have been thriving more on imparting a training, a crash course training pertaining to data science, so that you undergo this training and get employed. So we will touch base a little bit on that particular topic too. Okay, so I would like to start off with my presentation with a short quote which I coined. A statistician is like an anesthetist who always takes the backstage when an operation is conducted, but still plays a very, very important role. What does that mean? Because the role of a statistician and anesthetist is like, it depends upon the dose of the anesthesia that the doctor is giving. If you give less dose, it is a risk to the patient. The same thing, like if the sample size is less, then the credibility of your trial is very much doubted. If you give more dose, again the safety of the patient is also at risk, but that means you are spending more than what you should have ideally spent for conducting a clinical trial. So that's why this analogy with statistician and anesthetist is all about. So what is clinical research? So clinical research is nothing but a medical science which is a branch of medical science that determines the safety and efficacy of the treatment or medical device or diagnostic that we intend to use on any of the human being. So before you take, you have, how many of you in the room have taken some or any of the medication till date? Please raise your hands. Great. So which means that if you have taken medication, that means you should also really understand the journey that the molecule would have traveled right from the research lab to the market. And it undergoes certain tests, it undergoes certain trials before it is finally approved by the regulatory body for the human consumption. So that is what clinical research is all about. So let's take a journey about how the drug development life cycle happens. So this is a pictorial representation of how it starts off with 10,000 molecules. You start screening the molecules, 10,000 molecules are screened depending upon the indication that you would like to screen, depending on the target indication, say it's oncology or cardiovascular, whatever therapeutic area, 10,000 molecules are screened. That's the first stage of the drug discovery. And then afterwards, as it progresses from stage 1 to stage 2, you can see the molecules from 10,000 got reduced to 10 to 20 compounds in stage 2, where the preclinical testing of the compound happens. And then as it progresses to the next stage, that is stage 3. Stage 3 comprises of 3 stages. That's a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So by the time you come to phase 3, hardly 1 or 2 molecules are there. And when the regulatory body gives an approval of the drug, only 1 molecule comes out. So what does this signify? You start off with 10,000 molecules, and finally 1 molecule comes out at the end. which means the probability of the success is 1 by 10,000, that is 0.0001 is the probability of a molecule success. So that's what the success rate of a molecule when you start off with, which means how much time is involved, how much energy is involved, how much cost is involved in bringing this drug to the market. The next slide gives you an overview about what is the time and the cost of drug development. On an average, it takes around 12 years, and as per the recent reports, $2.6 billion is the cost that is invested in bringing a molecule from lab to the pharmacist or the market. But one thing is very common, which I think a couple of the people in our earlier talks have mentioned. The patient is the key in each and everything that we do in this particular business. The patient is the center. Anything that you do is impacting the patient. What does that mean? There are instances where you start with screening of the compounds, you get into discovery phase, then you go phase 1, phase 2, and all of a sudden the drug fails. You have invested 5 years, 6 years, and all of a sudden the drug fails. Maybe the patient would have been looking very eager to bring that drug to the market, because that's what the only hope for him to really lead a better life. But if that drug fails, the patient has to suffer the pain for a longer period of time till there is no another competitor who brings the drug to the market much faster. So that means in this particular profession that we do, accuracy and the speed plays a vital role, because the patient is the center of what all we do here. I know we have few of the people who are coming from pharma industry. Well, just wanted to understand if anybody has an opportunity to work in R&D. Great. So the next slide gives a perspective for the people who have not worked in a pharma R&D about what all functions are usually involved in a pharmaceutical R&D. It starts with medical chemistry, toxicology department, pharmacology department, analytical development, and clinical research. So these are the 5 functions or the groups or departments that you call which are there within the pharma R&D. So if you reflect back in the earlier slide which I mentioned, the screening of the compounds. So medical chemistry department is basically involved in screening of the compounds. Then it comes to the pharmacology department. The toxicology department is basically involved in understanding the toxicity of the drug that you are studying, whether it is toxic or not toxic. Then you have the pharmacology department, which understands the pharmacological effect of that particular drug. And then you have the analytical department, which tries to estimate the concentration of drug within blood, serum, or whatever medium that you are trying to measure the quantity of the drug. That is being carried out by the analytical department. And then the last is the clinical research, where the clinical trials that you conduct, all that thing is being managed by the clinical research department. So predominantly these are the 5 departments which are there in the R&D. Now what does the data and the statistician indicate? Each and every function do generate data. Each and every function do generate data. And as has been said by our VC, and Arjun also was mentioning in his talk, if there is a data, means statistician definitely exists there. So whenever a data is there, statisticians play a very important role to analyze the data, understand the trend, what exactly does that data mean to us. Going back to this almost covered the phase 1, so there are usually the 4 phases in the conduct of the clinical trial, which I covered in my earlier slide, so I skipped this off. History of the statisticians in the pharmaceutical industry. So how did the journey of statisticians in the pharmaceutical industry originate from? It all started from 1970s, 1980s, where statisticians were employed predominantly as a consultant, nothing beyond that, and the responsibility that they were involved with to calculate the sample size. Nothing beyond that. And then after a decade of 10 years, in 1990, they started involving in doing the safety and efficacy data analysis of the data. And then they were part of the integrated team of the global drug development. And then 2000 onwards, they became an integrated part of the unit, which means their involvement right from the very start, rather than at the end, only when the data is available, that thing was gone off. So they became a part, they were more strategic partners from 2000 onwards. So this is how the history of statisticians evolved in the pharma industry. Going to the next slide about the statistical application, the clinical research. So there are two broad areas within the clinical research, at least in the pharma industry, where statisticians play a role. One is the BA and BE, what I mentioned earlier, that is bioavailability or bioequivalence study, and the second is the clinical trials. However, when I say clinical trials, in some of the global companies, you have two functions. One is the trials where it's called as trial statistician, and another is called as statistical programming team. Now, it depends upon organization by how this really looks like, but these are the predominantly roles which are the activities that are usually carried out by any of the pharma industry. So when I say statistical program, definitely I will be talking a bit more. I have a slide to talk about what exactly a statistical programmer does. But in terms of a trial statistician, they are predominantly involved in writing the statistical related aspects of the study protocol. When the protocol of a study is being designed, at that point of time, the statistical related section write-up that has to be done, that is done by statistician. What statistical analysis needs to be done on the data that you intend to collect, those things are being written by the statistician. And also, he is a part of the kickoff meeting, the meeting that you conduct with the external stakeholders, like the clinical team, the data management team, the safety team. So liaising with all these people and having a kickoff meeting. Kickoff meeting, usually whenever you start a project, the functions, the representation from all the functions do catch up to understand what the study is all about, what is the expectation, is there any risk or challenge, and if there are any risks that we foresee, how we can mitigate those things. So this is what basically is what the trial statistician is involved at the start. Doing a bit of deep dive into what BA and B, I will not be doing I will not be talking too detail, but just giving a definition about bioavailability and bioequivalence. As the name signifies, bioavailability, biologically how it indicates a measurement of the rate and extent of which the drug is available in the body. To what extent the drug is available in the body is what defines bioavailability. And when I say bioequivalence, I am trying to compare the equivalence of one drug, my test drug, with a reference drug and say whether are these two drugs equivalent given the same dose. Say for 100 mg treatment A versus 100 mg treatment B, whether the two are equivalent or not, that is what defines bioequivalence. However, in terms of statistical application, what statistical tools are usually used when you carry out this bioavailability or bioequivalence studies? The thing is, the two-way crossover, from a design perspective, the crossover design, parallel design, and replicate design. So these are the predominantly three designs which are basically used when you carry out the bioequivalence study. However, in terms of statistical test, analysis of variance, 90% confidence interval, power, these are the three things that you basically are subjected to the pharmacokinetic data to establish the bioequivalence. Now, one thing I would recommend is that if anybody wants to, if any of you would like to pursue a career of statistician in the pharma industry, they need to be agile enough, which means that apart from your normal statistics as a subject, you also need to have a good understanding of the kinetics, pharmacokinetics subject, which help you to understand how the drug behaves in the body, what are the parameters that you are going to measure. So having a good understanding of pharmacokinetics is very, very much important. And on the left side, if you can see the clinical pharmacokinetics book, this is the book I used to refer in my early days by Malcolm Rowland and Thomas and Tozer. This was the book which I used to refer to understand, to get a basic understanding about what pharmacokinetics is all about. So this gives just a graphical representation. When you are doing a BA and bioavailability or bioequivalence study, imagine that when you take a drug, how the dosage of the drug will go like this, and then slowly it will eliminate from the body. In a pharmacokinetics language, it is also called as ADME, that is absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. So this whole pictorial diagram is represented as ADME process as to how the drug within the body will behave. In terms of, I will not be going through each and every point, but just highlight on few of the important points with regard to the role of statistician in bioequivalence studies. definitely during the protocol, when the protocol is being designed, at that point of time, the role of statistician is very much important to write the statistical section. Sampling time point selection. As I mentioned earlier, that pharmacokinetics knowledge is very much important because it's the role of a statistician to identify what time points I would be using to collect the blood samples once the treatment is given. And that characterization has to be such that at least I get a proper characterization of the entire drug. So that's why the statistician play an important role in the sampling time point selection. Sample size selection, which has already been discussed. Design of the study, whether I should be opting for a crossover, parallel or replicate. Again, there are some yardsticks to really opt, okay, if this is the variability factor, then I will be opting for this design. If this is the variable, if this is the half-life of the drug, then I will be opting for a parallel design. Randomization, pharmacokinetic statistical computation, statistical report generation, quality of the output, and also the last but not the least, responding to any of the regulatory audits, regulatory queries, because you generate a report and you submit the report to the regulatory body, and tomorrow if regulatory body comes up with some clarification on the report that you have submitted, then definitely it's the role of the statistician to really understand what is the query and respond them in an effective manner. Going about what is clinical trial. So clinical trial is nothing but, in a layman's language, as I mentioned earlier, that whenever any treatment has to be brought to the market, is whenever a treatment has to be consumed, before the treatment can be consumed by human beings, the clinical trial needs to be conducted, which means that the safety and the efficacy of that particular treatment has to be established. And unless and until the safety and efficacy of the treatment is not established, you can't do anything. And that establishment can be carried out by conducting a clinical trial. In terms of the role of statistician in a clinical trial, most of the points are common, like inputs of the statistical section during the writing of the protocol, generation of randomization schedule, sample size, input during the design of the CRF or ECRF. This is a very important thing that, as Arjun was mentioning about the clinical data management, that when you intend to conduct a clinical trial, you know, okay, this is what my objective of the trial is, and for meeting my objective, what are the endpoints that I need to collect, and for that I need to design the CRF. Now, it's the role of the statistician, they have to verify that whether the CRF that has been intended to collect the data has captured each and every data point that it should have actually have captured each and every data that ideally it should capture. Imagine of a situation that you have conducted entire trial, and at the end, when you transfer your data to the statistician, and statistician say, okay, where is this data? I need this data to establish the safety or efficacy of the drug. And all of a sudden you say, sorry, we didn't collect this data. Was it really required? If that becomes the case, then all the amount of energy, time and effort that has been invested in the conduct of the clinical trial goes down the drain. Number two, the patient who was looking forward for the treatment, he is getting disappointed. More than that, feel the pain that if that patient is somebody your near and dear person, and you are looking for that particular treatment, and if such goof up happens, then imagine the consequences that you really go through, the trauma that you can go through. So that's why the role of a statistician is very, very critical and very, very important when he has to review the design of the CRF, whether each and every elements have been really captured for collecting that particular data. Writing statistical analysis plan, reviewing of the edit check document, mock shells, listings and figures, programming for generating the tables, listings and figures. Basically, as I mentioned earlier, that in certain global companies you have two roles, the trial statistician and the statistical programmer. So statistical programmer usually is involved in writing the programs for generating the tables, listings and figures. What does that mean? Whatever data you are going to collect from the clinical trial, that data is, you try to convert the data into tables, listings and figures, and that ELFs are being handed over to the medical writing team for writing the clinical study report, that is called a CSR report, which then would be submitted to the regulatory body for getting the marketing approval of that particular drug. And that's of the things I already covered. And if you are very much interested to really brush up your knowledge on the application of statistics in clinical trial, I would recommend definitely to read Pharmaceutical Statistics by Stanford and Bolton, which is one of the very good book which has each and everything explained in a very, very layman language. Statistical programmer, which I mentioned, The primary responsibility of a statistical programmer is to import the data from various sources. One of the sources could be your, the CDMS system, which could be either OCRDC or RAVE or whatever platform you are using for collecting the data. That is the one source. But apart from that, there could be many external data sources like lab data, ECG data, IVR data, imaging data. You collect the data from all the source and then pool those data and then try to do the transformation before you generate the tables, listings and figures. So that's what predominantly the role of a statistical programmer is. In terms of the competency, if you are looking forward to explore this particular area, then the points listed below is some of the areas that you need to be familiar with. One is the SAS programming language. I know we have been talking about SPSS since morning, but another most commonly and widely used software in the industry is the SAS. So SAS programming knowledge, understanding the knowledge of the regulatory guidance, because if you are working for a particular, if you want to submit a report for a particular regulatory body, then you need to really understand the rules and guidance of that particular regulatory body, be US FDA, be Japan, PMDA or EMEA, whichever regulatory body you intend to submit, because each regulatory body has their own expectation. So having a sound knowledge about that regulatory body is very much important. Good knowledge of the statistical concepts, that goes without saying. Domain knowledge. Depending upon the domain in which you are operating, the domain here which we are discussing is about pharmaceutical. Since we are discussing about application of statistics in pharma, that's why the sound understanding about the pharma domain is very, very much important. And the knowledge of data standards, since we are going to bring the data from various sources and integrate those data, do the transformation before you generate the tables, listings and figures, the knowledge of data standards is very, very much important. That is CDISC, CDASH, SGTM data, ADAM data standards. These are very, very much important. Going to the role of statistician in centralized data monitoring. Whenever we conduct any clinical trial, in the traditional way of conducting the clinical trial, what usually happens? The data is entered by the site and then the monitor does the source data verification, 100% source data verification. That's the norm which industry has been following till date. But it has also been proved that 100% source data verification is not equal to 100% data quality. And that's why the concept of risk-based monitoring has come into existence, where you are only doing the monitoring based on the risk that you identify within the study. And centralized statistical monitoring is one component within your RBM, where the statistician along with data managers or clinical people can monitor the data remotely, identify the data, identify the trends, identify the patterns, identify the signals based on how the data is behaving, and can signal to the monitor, hey, please go to this particular site or please go to that particular site because I see something suspicious there or I see something not working here. Rather than drawing a straight line, you go based on where the risk is and where the risk is not. So that's where statisticians play an important role from a data monitoring perspective. This is the most important slide I would like to spend a couple of minutes here. In terms of the competencies required for the statistician in the pharmaceutical industry, everybody wants to really, based on some of the conversation I was having in morning, yes, everybody wants to look forward to have their career in the pharma industry. But there is some expectation in terms of what exactly it needs to be a part of that particular industry. Definitely a couple of things have already been covered, like statistical tools usage and interpretation. Using of tools is very much easy. You subject a data and then you get an output, and then interpreting that output, what exactly this output means, and how the hypothesis should be framed, and what is that I interpret based on output. That is very, very much important. Second is domain knowledge. Understand, it goes without saying that in whichever domain you are operating, if you are trying to build your career as a statistician in banking sector, then you need to know the fundamentals of banking sector. In pharma, then you need to know the fundamentals of pharma sector. Whichever domain you want to operate, ensure that you have your fundamentals very, very clear. Third is agility. You need to be very, very flexible. You cannot be rigid in this industry, which means that if it necessitates you to learn something new, like I started off myself as a statistician, but then I had to learn Pharmacokinetics, I had to put some effort of time, I had to learn programming. If I have to learn something else new in order to survive myself, in order to sustain myself in the industry, that flexibility you should be having. If you are rigid enough that no, this is what I am going to be and I can't learn, then I'm sorry, that's to be put it very bluntly, this is not the industry that you can survive. So you need to be very, very flexible enough to learn, keep on upgrading yourself. As Arjuna was also mentioning, you need to constantly keep on upgrading yourself, without which you cannot do anything. Networking and communication skills. This is very, very much important because working in a pharma industry, you alone are not going to work. You need to work in collaboration with other stakeholders like data management, safety people, clinical people, monitoring people. There are tons of stakeholders with external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. So you need to have that networking skills and good communication skills. Understanding of data standards and able to explain statistics to non-statistician. I think our next speaker post my session will be discussing in detail about this, but this is very, very much important because when you are working in pharma industry, there could be many people with whom you are working. They might not be well versed with the concepts, the statistical jargon that we many times use, like sample size, confidence interval, power. They really cannot relate themselves to what exactly you are meaning. Can you help me to come down to my level and explain what exactly you are trying to say? Then they can understand that. So able to explain the concepts, statistical concepts in a non-statistical language is very, very much important. Okay, so this was something I found during my recent read about the statistician job market over the next 10 years. This is a US labor report that I could found. So the top 10 jobs projected to grow faster in US, and statistician is one of the top 10 jobs which is growing at a faster rate as compared to rest of the others. So if you are looking forward for a career as a statistician, then I think you can rejoice looking to this data. I think we have been hearing a lot about data science since morning, but just let me take a step back to help you all to give a context what exactly we are meaning here by data science. Now, if you see of late, there has been a significant disruption on the technology front. Significant disruption on the technology front. The pace at which the technology has been growing, it has been phenomenal. So technology disruption has led to data disruption. And data is the new oil for all of us. Now the need of the hour is how we can convert this data into insights which will help us to make informed decisions. And how we are going to convert that data into insights for making an informed decision, it's only through data science concepts. And that's what basically data science is all about. Sorry. So data science, what it's all about is nothing but analyzing data has been a long history and is not something new. There have been many terminologies that we had been using of late, like statistics, artificial intelligence, business intelligence, data analytics, n number of jargons we use, but bottom line, the work that we do below that is the same, how to convert the data into information which helps us to make an informed decision. That's what basically data science is all about. So let's try to understand some of the buzzwords which we have been hearing since morning in artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive analytics, descriptive analytics, prescriptive analytics. What is all about that? So machine learning is nothing but the ability of the machine to learn itself based on the data without having to explicitly program. So if you see of late the use of machine learning in clinical research, maybe in my next slide I will share some examples, some practical examples which has really given wonderful results of how this ML concepts have been used in the clinical research space. So machine learning is nothing but you have a data with you, you write an algorithm, you train the algorithm with your data, and then try to subject the production data to that algorithm to see whether my algorithm can accurately predict the upcoming event or not. So that is what basically machine learning is all about. Artificial intelligence is nothing but the ability of the machine to carry out the task in a way that could be considered as smart. Descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive, we all know descriptive is nothing but what has happened. You give a descriptive statistics like mean, median, mode, skewness, and all those things you give. That is what descriptive statistics of any data that you have at your end. That's what descriptive statistics. Predictive is all about knowing about the future, what is that you can predict based on the data that you have. And prescriptive is nothing but what should we do. Let me help you to give an example, clinical research example to understand these concepts. Say for example, if you work, most of you are working in a pharma company, you definitely will be having a repository of clinical sites at your end. The clinical team would be having an inventory of all the sites that they might have used till date for carrying out a clinical trials. Now, I want to conduct a new trial maybe in the next month. Then the first thing that I say, okay, these are the 10 sites I would like to go with, 1 to 10. Is it fair enough? Okay, then maybe based on the data, the historical data that I have with me, I subject it to machine learning algorithm to see which sites has a highest, which site can help me to recruit the required number of patients in the time frame that I am looking forward. Maybe I would get some different set of sites. So I am predicting based on my data that these are the 10 sites which I am preferring you to go with. So prescriptive is you had some 10, I am recommending you 10, now this is the prescription I am giving that this is what you should be going with in order to ensure that you enroll the given number of patients for your trial in the given time frame. So that is what basically is what prescriptive analysis is all about. Predictive is nothing but you are just predicting based on the historical data that you have with you. Nothing to get scared about. Statistical tests basically that are used in the machine learning like linear regression, decision tree, logistic regression, naive-based classifier, and the tools that have been used is like Microsoft SQL Azure, Hadoop, R, which Arjun was mentioning, Python also is being used. So these are some of the tools which are the machine learning algorithm are developed using some of these particular tools. So these are some of the classic examples. There are tons and tons of examples as to how ML and AI has been used in the clinical research space for creating those wonders. So a couple of examples is like diabetic retinopathy. This is one of the fastest growing cause of the blindness. And if it is not treated in a timely fashion, then it would lead to permanent blindness. Now, Google has developed a deep learning algorithm which would help you to identify the diabetic patients. This algorithm will help to identify the diabetic patient based on the retina image scan. So if this algorithm was not there, then maybe the physician might have to take half an hour time to really understand whether this patient has really diabetic problem or not and then give a treatment. But this algorithm will scan the patient in minutes or in seconds and give a list of patients, okay, these patients are suffering from diabetic retinopathy. So that way, the areas where there is a scarcity of doctors and time, this algorithm will be a boon for them because it will help you to screen more number of patients and you can treat more number of patients. The another classic example is about the Watson IBM AI algorithm. This was one of the instance where a Japanese woman, she was suffering from leukemia, one rare leukemia, which went undiagnosed for 2 months. The doctors have been trying since 2 months to identify what is the disease this lady is suffering from, and it didn't yield any good results. But when this algorithm, the Watson's AI algorithm could identify in few minutes it could run across millions of research papers and identify that this lady is suffering from so and so disease, and they were able to treat the disease in a timely manner. So you can imagine the power that this ML and AI will bring tomorrow in the clinical research space. The another classic example is about the Stanford University, where the doctors have created an algorithm and to detect the skin cancer. And this algorithm was tested against 21 certified dermatologists. And the accuracy with which this algorithm did predict that skin cancer for a patient was so high that it did beat the dermatologist also. Which means you can imagine the power that this data science will bring tomorrow in the clinical research world, and we as a statisticians have a bigger role to play in this particular part. So, points to remember: statistics can never prove or disprove. All it can do is whether to accept or reject the hypothesis. That's what statistics will do. So statistics should never be used as, it's good to use, make any decisions, but should not be used as a yardstick. And one interesting quote, data does not make sense, we will have to resort to statistics. Let's not really get into that situation, because my data is not making any sense to me. I should not be using statistics to back up my data. It should be other way around. And finally, to call the statistician after the experiment is done may be no more than asking him to perform a post-mortem experiment. All may be able to say what the experiment did died of, nothing beyond that. With that, I conclude my presentation and would be more than happy to take up any questions which anybody has. Thank you.